is nominally the largest Pentagon budget request in history. And that doesn't even include the $51 billion in the Overseas Contingency Operation account, which is not in the base budget, as you know. So it's up to you. Congress is going to have to fix it. Either raise the caps, do a workaround, or we would recommend considering some sensible cuts, some savings that would actually make us safer. There's some great ideas represented here with the tremendous expertise on our panel. Many of these ideas transcend partisanship. There has been great work done, particularly on the House side, in terms of cooperation across the aisle in putting forth sensible savings, particularly reining in some of the profligate spending at the Pentagon, agreeing that not all of the proposed spending is effective weapon systems or effective strategy, or we have concerns about a lot of waste, and we think there's great potential for looking at savings. So that's what we'll do here today, and I think what we'll do is we'll start with Laicie Heeley, who works with me at the Center and Council. She and the rest of our team has put together our annual defense budget briefing book, which we recommend to you. It's on the table over there with handouts, but she'll walk us through it. Basically, it is what the budget represents in comparisons with past requests. And then we'll have Bill Hartung, who is the Director of Arms Control and Security Project at the Center for International Policy. And then we'll have some remarks from Keith Supp, who is President of National Taxpayers Union. And then we'll open it up. We'll try to keep our remarks brief so that we can have a real dialogue and answer your questions. We're interested in hearing your ideas as well. So welcome and thank you, Laicie.
Good morning, good morning.
Move everything up here. Stand up. Then I can see my slides on the very fancy screen, right? Hi, I'm Laicie Heeley. I'm the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation. We do a briefing book every year at the President's request, laying everything out, so I'll walk you guys through a little bit of that and give a little bit of context as well that's not included in the briefing book. It's mostly just charts and graphs, so explaining a little bit behind the reason why we included some of them and what you can expect to see over the course of going into this authorization and appropriations of this particular budget. So starting out, these are the numbers that you've seen probably already. We have a base budget of $543.3 billion and $50.9 for overseas contingency operations. That's a base budget of almost 8% over what was enacted last year. So it's a pretty big jump over what was enacted last year. That's a 4.4% increase overall. That's when you include everything, including defense-related activities at the Department of Energy, which is all of your nuclear weapons, at NSA, activities, and other defense-related funding, which is some of the FBI and various other funding that appears in the 050 budget. So overall, we still see even a pretty big increase, regardless of whether or not you're just looking at the base or the overall budget that the President has set forth, and we're significantly over the caps, which we'll have a chart on that as well. We'll look a little bit further into the caps. The OCO budget, though, Overseas Contingency Operations, essentially war funding budget, you'll notice is still primarily going to fund Afghanistan. $7.9 billion of this is earmarked for investment, equipment, reset, and readiness, which Bob Work even acknowledged a few days ago is stuff that you would generally see in the base budget. That's their helicopters, fixed-wing aircraft, trucks, other tactical vehicles, MRAPs, radios, combat support equipment, things that are all being replaced, that we've actually been replacing for years. We've been replacing those things as the war was going on. We now are continuing to replace as the war is drawing down, although $42 billion still seems like a pretty big budget for that Afghanistan effort as the war is drawing down, with a full almost $8 billion of that going to fund that reset. This, while we're seeing about $5 billion going to operations against ISIS, and less than $1 billion in Iraq, and various other funding for Ebola and counterterrorism, and European Reassurance Initiative over here in the other three, about $2.9 billion. Our next slide looks at funding differences between the services. This is going to be an issue more and more as we continue to discuss things like the possibility of an additional sea-based deterrence fund that the Navy is currently arguing for to fund the replacement of the Ohio-class submarines. The Navy and Air Force right now this is the first budget where we're seeing the modernization of the nuclear triad sort of showing up. That's really going to ramp up in the 2020s and 2030s. Right now it's a smaller amount, but it's going to ramp up so much in the 2020s and 2030s that it's actually going to take over the Navy's budget and a large portion of the Air Force budget, forcing them to not be able to buy anything else. Their fix for that is to ask for extra money out of the defense-wide fund. And shove some other programs out, because why have to pick and choose between their own programs when they can definitely just move it over here and work from a little extra pot. Now the Army's not going to like that, given that their share of the funds is already decreasing even a little bit beyond the 24% that they had last year to a little bit below 24%, 23.7 this year, as compared to 30.1 and 28.6% for the Navy and Air Force. That's going to offset that even more than it already is, and sort of leave the Army with a much smaller share than that. What we like to consider the sort of even 30% that they would otherwise end up with, but have not in quite some time. Over the long term, the President's proposal shows us going up to, or it's coming in consistently over the caps. So we see that this year we're coming in about $35 billion over the caps, and next year we would also come in $35 billion up to FY20, where we're still coming in $20 billion over the projected caps right now. So we can see in this next graph, which is shows sort of the difference between the blue line where the caps would take us and the yellow line where the President's budget would sort of jumping up very significantly and continuing to increase as we go out to FY20. These are the trends throughout the years that we have seen since the Budget Control Act was passed. We see that, and you can see actually this graph here is in the book if you'd like the numbers, but you can see it even better in this graph, where the blue line at the top is where we started, where our FY12 projected budget would have been. These lines below are each successive year that the President has put out a budget. And so you see, though there is a reluctance to come in line with the Budget Control Act caps, there has been a general downsizing of the budget every year. So there has been, it's coming down slowly this year, not as quickly as some past budgets. This one is tracking back up a little bit, particularly in the out years, but very closely with our FY15 budget. And you can see how that top line works out over, but this is actually since FY01, since we started, went into the wars. We see that we have gone down some through the Budget Control Act caps, but the President's budget would have us again going up. Now, something comes into play here with the $27 billion that is sitting as a placeholder for overseas contingency operations. In the budget, the President actually lays out a plan to bring overseas contingency operations back into the base budget. He says that he will propose this plan, but the interesting thing is he says he will propose this plan, but it will depend on Congress to get rid of the caps first. So the President would very much like to combine the two, but it seems at this same amount with this extra $27 billion sticking around, but just sticking around in the base budget. So that will be an interesting thing to see how that plays out. It's significantly, it's definitely an increase. And as Angela mentioned, the base budget in nominal terms is higher than it's ever been, and we're back to 2012 levels, I believe, for the whole budget. So going into defense activities at the Department of Energy. This is interesting because you see that weapons activities has gone up just very slightly from 818 to from 8.2 to 8.5 billion. But what's interesting about that is that 234 million of that was actually transferred out this year and into the nuclear non-proliferation account. So that particular line item, the weapons activities line item, has gone up more than you would even expect it to. It's actually gone up by almost $1 billion. And this is looking a little bit deeper into the non-proliferation line item. We can see that things have been shifted around. Things that were once zero, now we created some new accounts. Things that were zero in FY15 and in the request and the enacted that now have money, those are actually new accounts. But those are not shifting straight across the board. So the GTRI, the Global Threat Reduction Initiative, did not just become global material security. Some things have moved around between those accounts. So overall, defense nuclear nonproliferation is 18% higher than the enacted last year, but it's actually only 4% because of what I mentioned before, that 234 billion has moved from the weapons activities line item to the nuclear nonproliferation line item. So while it may look like non-proliferation spending is going up significantly, it has not gone up as significantly as weapons spending. And finally, some major weapons programs that we have in this year's spending request. What we see overall in this year's spending request is a focus on large weapons programs. Many of the President's proposals for savings are actually things that Congress has rejected before, and the President very much knows Congress will reject again. Things like a new RAC grant and TRICARE, significant TRICARE changes. And rather than propose savings in the weapons programs or other things that may actually be accepted, maybe potentially more likely to be accepted, or a smaller amount of growth, for example, in the F-35, where we're seeing a large jump from 30-some airplanes up to 57 airplanes this year and $10.6 billion. The President has actually proposed more spending on large weapons programs, and this is also as the nuclear modernization accounts come into play, and we see more funding for the Ohio-class replacement sub, the long-range strike bomber, a new ICBM leg of the Triad, and a new air-launched cruise missile, all things that will replace the entire nuclear weapons delivery system. So we can see, particularly when we look at these things, that where the focus is in this year's budget. And I will let Bill and Pete go into the details of those and some of the political implications. And thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thanks, Laicie. Bill?